I'm Zach Turner, and I'm with Single Hill Brewing in Yakima, Washington, and here is your craft beer and brewing tip of the week. A fresh hop beer, I guess at its most basic, like the broad category, would be a beer that's brewed featuring hops that were freshly picked. Picked within a few days of using them in the brew. That would be, I guess, the simplest way to define it. At this point in time, I think a lot of people think about fresh hop beers in different ways. There's a few really common definitions. Another basic one would be a wet hop beer. And a wet hop beer would be slightly more specific than a fresh hop beer. Kind of like Scotch is slightly more specific than a bourbon or a whiskey in particular. So a wet hop beer would be a beer that features primarily wet hops, so hops that haven't gone through a kiln, haven't been dried at all. They're still wet. They have a lot of moisture content to them, and you're going to get a very different character from that than using dried hops. And then I think there are probably three main ways that people define their fresh hop beers depending on their brewery. And the most common is that breweries will go and get hops or order wet hops, make a beer basically following a normal process in the brew house, add wet hops into a hop back, whether they have an actual hop back or they're just using their mash tun, and then finish that beer however they do. Put it in the tank, ferment it, and then add T90 hop pellets or however else they like to finish their IPAs, whether it's an IPA or a pale ale. It tends to be IPAs and pale ales. That's probably the vast majority of people that are making fresh hop beers. Could be a whole lot, but it's usually wet hops on the hot side, finished with T90 pellets from wherever, or extracts or products, however they like to make and finish their IPAs on the dry hop side. The other way that's pretty common is brew a beer relatively normally the entire way through the hot side, through the brew house. Fill your fermenter, ferment it, and then transfer that beer onto wet hops, either at the end of fermentation when you would typically dry hop to get a wet hop infused kind of dry hop, or taking it one step further, make a beer pretty much normally all the way through to packaging, and right before packaging transfer it onto wet hops in the bright tank or a secondary vessel before you keg it, before you can it, whatever you're gonna do. Or even if you just have a fun project you wanna try, taking finished beer in a keg, even racking it into another keg that you can put stuff in, like do infusions, put wet hops in there, infuse it for 24 hours, take it out, put it in a new keg and serve it. That method is super convenient because you can really do it on a moment's notice. You don't have to change your recipes, you don't have to change your process very much. You can infuse wet hop character into a beer and get beer out to market really quickly. And in the case of doing those sort of little mini keg infusions, you can try a lot of different hops and make something kind of special and fun and unique for your tap room that only is one keg large. You can serve it through in a week. The next most common way to make a fresh hop beer, so again, a beer made with hops that are freshly picked within a few days, would be to use fresh dried hops. Skip the wet hop thing because it's complicated and heavy and expensive, and go for just using dried hops. And this is going to be common and familiar to a lot of people if you think about Sierra Nevada Celebration as probably archetypal example of that. Beer is labeled and called a fresh hop beer. It doesn't include any wet hops. But what they do is come to Yakima, select their early season hops like Centennial and Cascade, and then immediately get those bales on a truck sent down to Chico and put into Celebration for the year. So that beer is a fresh hop beer in the sense that its character comes from hops that were just picked, but there are hops that were just picked, dried, and baled. They're still using them really, really quickly. So in the broad sense of fresh hop beer, I'd say that still definitely qualifies, and what they're trying to do is capture the flavor of the harvest, whatever's newest, freshest that they can get in there. And it's a celebration, be kind of a theme of this. Then the Single Hill way that we've kind of evolved towards over time is to kind of combine that first example of wet hops on the hot side, and then the last one of using dried cones to impart the rest of the flavor. To learn more about our fresh approach to fresh hop brewing, click the link below.